we're going to start a conversation that is needed but often overlooked because it's uncomfortable. Um, we don't talk about it at the dinner table. We don't usually sit in our churches and speak on it. Um, we don't like it. It's icky, you know. It's kind of gross. Um, so we're going to dive into depression and suicide and learn kind of the symptoms, what to look for, the differences, how it corresponds with substance abuse, and ultimately into suicide, so that we can learn that for ourselves, but also to help others around us. Uh, but first, introduction. Hi, I'm Mandy. I work for Living Well Counseling. We are a ministry of Arkansas Baptist Children and Family Ministry. I have been at Living Well almost 2 years. And I love it there. Before Living Well, I worked for Community Mental Health. I initially started at an element where I worked for Community Mental Health, but my office was inside of an elementary school, if that tells you how deep and wide all of this goes. And so I worked to build up a program there, so there would be therapists on site. And then once I left there, I went to residential substance abuse, where I was the lead therapist there, and I worked with co-occurring disorders, which is just a fancy way of saying substance abuse and mental health issues. But if you know anything about substance abuse, you know mental health issues go hand in hand. Also worked with the federal prisoners there. We would get them as they were going in. Some were looking at life. I worked with the ones, again, with co-occurring disorders. And I worked on the crisis team where my cell phone came on at 5 p.m. when I got off work for 22 counties in the state of Arkansas. I was the crisis line where it was typically orphans and orphanages and prisons or jails where I had to screen. And then it would go off at 8 a.m. when I would go back to work. It was super fun, wasn't it, Clayton? They would call me just all night long. So that was my background before coming to Living Well. It was very, very intense. This is a much lovelier atmosphere. But because of that, I know the product of depression, substance abuse, suicide. You often do find it in the prison world, substance abuse world. People often say, how did you get into this? You know, it's so dark. I like to say God gave it to me from birth. I was born into it. My dad was an addict. He had mental health issues. My grandfather died from addiction, mental health issues. I buried my dad 9 years ago on his birthday. Mental health issues and substance abuse. Fast forward that, a year and a half ago, my brother overdosed, buried him. I'm 48. I buried him when he was 47. So I've just always known it. I've always known the fight and how hard it is for some people. And so it was just the right transition in life for me to continue on. Sometimes God just gives us that way, doesn't he? But the question is, who's struggling? Is it the prisoners? Is it substance abuse? Who is it? And I would have you look around. Can you tell me by looking in this room who did not want to get up this morning? Who in this room has thought this week about not wanting to make it to tomorrow? You can't. But we often think it has a look, that it looks like the prisoner or it looks like the person with substance abuse. But it looks like us. It looks like everyone in here. And I think that's the thing that scares us the most. It looks like our kids. It looks like our grandkids, right? My office was in the elementary school, So we're going to move into the depression part of this and just kind of get a grasp on what it is, because we use that word all the time. I always like to say it's a little Eeyore-ish, but situational depression is the depression we've all faced, right? It's the depression we know. Uh, you're right, you can't hardly see those words back there. It's triggered by situation or loss of a loved one, a divorce, a job loss. It's the thing, it's the stressor. There's like this event, and it kind of makes us not want to give up. If you've ever lost anyone, you understand the depression that comes with grief. And it just makes us not want to do anything. And we all face that one. That's the one that we know that we're not super scared of. But at the same time, we often get uncomfortable with it because we want people just to get out of it. Like, move on, right? Pull your bootstraps up. Uh, but the problem is that it can lead to harsher things like clinical depression. Um, I'm coming over here, y'all. The symptoms that you see typically are the same as clinical depression, but they're not as harsh. There's sadness, worry, overwhelming, difficulty coping with a triggering event. You've all seen it. You've probably lived it. If you say you haven't, I'm going to question that in a huge way. But it usually resolves, right? You can usually kind of get out of it. Clinical depression is very different than situational depression. However, situational depression can go into clinical depression. Clinical depression can be situational depression that didn't go away. Okay, and it's the harsher depression. It can also be linked to genetics, biology. If you've ever known a person that just kind of seems like Eeyore, and then you meet their family and you're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. They just kind of have that way about them. That would be clinical depression. It lasts a long time. These are people that have fatigue, low energy, they can't sleep, they eat too much or too less. If you see a person that's hugely obese, you probably got clinical depression. Concentrating, but also thoughts of death and self-harm, whereas situational depression, not necessarily, right? So this is where we're starting to kind of move into the bad stuff. This is the part where it's like, we need help. You're probably not coming out of this one by yourself. This is where you need to call Living Well. Okay. When you know someone like this or you become someone like this is kind of a big red flag. Like, we need help pretty much now. But we don't all get to this one. We haven't all been to this one. Depression is a big deal, but I think sometimes we hear it so much we get tired of it. Or I know people come to me, and in like the church world, you'll hear, we'll just pray harder, faith more. But there's a lot of biological stuff to this. And I don't know what life y'all have lived, but man, life's hard, y'all. It can be hard. Depression, 29% of adults have been diagnosed at some point in their life. But I want you to note that that's diagnosed. That's not necessarily, those are people that went to treatment and got diagnosed, right? 29%. 22% are currently being treated for it. Depression is the leading cause of disability. If we could get a rein in on that, we would help the disability system. And I think that it helped. I mean, there's a lot for therapists there with depression, but our churches, man, y'all are the front lines with this sort of thing. 21 million adults in the U.S. are struggling. 1 in every 12 have a major episode this year. That's in a room full of 100. That's 8 to 10 people who are quietly struggling, which means right now there's 1 or 2 in here that are quietly struggling, and they're keeping it to themselves. And I think that's a big question to ask just as an individual and as a body. Why do people feel the need to keep it in? Are we not safe places? Do we have that judgment? Are we, throwing dispersion on people who are just needing help? Just things to ponder. Depression is also 3 times higher for individuals with people with low income. Also something to keep in mind when you're dealing with the population. But the biggest for me is the kids. Uh, High school students in 2023, 40%, 40%. That's a lot, y'all. Reported feelings of sadness or hopelessness consistently. That's almost half of our teenagers say that they feel persistently sad or hopeless. Hopeless is where we're going to start having red flags again for suicide. That's not stress. That is soul level despair. And a lot of them are in our churches and in our youth groups. This is something to be seriously aware of and watch. 20% have seriously considered suicide. And by seriously, that means they've made a plan. They've said, Thursday, I'm going to hang myself in my closet. That's seriously contemplating suicide. It's making a plan. 20%. That's a lot of young people, y'all. 1 in 5 teens have considered in their life. That's to me, this is where the stuff gets really alarming with suicide is the kids, because the question again to me is why? Why is it such a big number? And what are we not doing? What is the church is not doing? Like, is there just such a large number? Okay, trying to figure this out, sorry. And this is one reason I do these presentations, is to get that awareness out, because as a therapist, I know what the numbers are because I sit with people every day. I have a waiting list to see people. I can't keep enough hours. I mean, I'm constantly changing my hours around just to keep the people coming. And there's weeks where I'm there 9 to 6 without a lunch, and it's just back to the sessions are an hour long. You can see that, right? So it's overwhelming, the system, and we just need more people that are safe, people that can help others find a lifeline. That's what we need. Every 40 seconds, someone dies from suicide. That's a big number. Every 40 seconds. And that's not even, to me, I think of my own brother who died from an overdose. And I consider that as a personal thing, like almost like a soft suicide. You don't take your life to the end constantly every day with drugs without there being some sort of suicidal ideation going on in your mind. And this number doesn't even represent something like that. This is just out and out suicide. It's a very, very large number. According to the World Health Organization, 700,000 people die by suicide every single year. That's significant. In the United States, it is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 14. And I'm just going to let that sit with you for a minute, because if that is not alarming to you, ages 10 to 14, the second leading cause of death. It is the third leading cause of death for 15 to 19-year-olds. 45 to 55-year-old men and 75 plus have the highest suicide rates. Back to the kids for me again, though. Wow. That is a large number. I've looked into statistics on pastors, and there is not an exact number, but there is a trajectory going up of suicides among pastors, and they say it's contributing from the occupational stress, isolation, and the stigma around mental health in religious settings, which again is why I do this, to try to take away this stigma that this is normal and this is life. And until we start bringing these conversations to the dinner table, it's isolating, and that's when people commit suicide. Women attempt suicide more often than men, but men die at a higher rate. That's kind of, women often take pills and then they may get help. Someone may save them. Men use lethal means. When they do it, they do it. Therefore, they die at a higher rate, but women do it more often. More than 90%, the risk of suicide is 3 times higher for those with substance abuse. And 90% of people who die by suicide have depression, substance abuse, or both. So all of those are huge red flags. Obviously, male, that's a red flag. Ages 10 to, I want to say 19, red flag. Substance abuse. If you know someone who is in substance abuse, I don't know a single person who has been an addict that does not have mental health issues. Healthy people aren't like, hey, let me figure how to get blown out. You know, that's just not what they're doing. That is mentally unhealthy people and spiritually unhealthy people, right? There are some factors and warning signs for suicide. Obviously, depression, anxiety, but also bipolar disorder. It's a mental health diagnosis. That's a big factor in suicide. Substance abuse, high factor. Trauma history. You know, people with chronic illness or chronic pain, those people often attempt at a larger rate than the typical population. Access to lethal means or social isolation. And I think you can look at that and go, great, that's a little list, let's check it off. But I think where that can help us as just people is we know people like this, right? We know people with chronic pain, chronic illness. We know people who live in social isolation. We know people who've had bad trauma abuse histories. These are the people that need extra attention. These people need for you to reach out. They need a lifeline. They need to know that you're a safe person. Warning signs for the suicide is talking about feeling hopeless, helpless, talking about death, withdrawing from friends or family, back to the isolation, sudden mood changes or calmness after depression, which is kind of a big one. If you know someone who's been in like clinical depression and they have not been showering, they have not been leaving their house, they have not been going to work, they've not been doing any of those things, and then all of a sudden, the very next day you see them, they're showered, they're calm, they're resolved. They've made a decision, is what that typically means. Calmness right after that storm is a red flag. Obviously, giving away your possessions or saying goodbye is a huge red flag. These are warning signs just for our own knowledge, because sometimes when you're not in the mental health world and you see someone depressed and all of a sudden they are fantastic, you think to yourself, well, fantastic. You know, you don't see it as a red flag. Verbal cues that indicate suicidal thoughts. I won't read all of these. But there's some direct statements that people make. Sometimes I wish I just wouldn't wake up. That's one that I hear 90% of the time. That's a red flag, right? Indirect or passive statements. I'm just tired of being here. I think everyone would be better off without me. Everybody's probably heard that one. I just want some peace. I don't think I can keep going. What's the point of living? Chronic ill people, I feel like a burden. Elderly people, I feel like a burden. These are red flags that people are already starting to contemplate. How would I be better off just not being here? Right? The hopelessness or helplessness, nothing ever changes. I've tried everything and nothing works. Nobody can help me. Someone comes to you and sits you down and wants to thank you for everything you've ever done for them. Now, these individually, right, and isolating are not red flags. It's a picture, right? someone can thank you for everything you've done and they're not suicidal, right? Uh, but if you've had someone with severe depression, now all of a sudden they're good and now they're thanking you for everything you've ever done and they're giving you something of theirs, that whole picture is a big red flag. I love you. Just wanted you to know that. Can be a normal statement, right? But again, it's the whole picture that we're looking for. We also have behavioral cues. The isolation is universal, but I think of teenagers. I think of the young people. Anybody have teenagers or teenage grandkids, or they just stay in the room all the time? They isolate. Maybe they don't have a lot of friends or activities. Or isolation is a big red flag, right? Especially if they have no life outside of that. I'm not saying if they're super busy all the time and then spend time in their room, it's a red flag. But if they have no life and they're in their room all the time, they may need a lifeline. Skipping work, school, avoiding things, giving away possessions. That sudden calm after depression, kind of what we were talking about, may signal a decision that they've made a decision to follow through. Risky or self-destructive behavior, which is how we get to the substance abuse. When you're looking at teenagers, you're looking at sneaking out, you're looking at trying drugs, sex, impulsive acts, things that are risky that they don't need to be doing, behavior cues that they are, again, people who are, kingdom minded and looking towards their future are participating in risky acts. There's not. So again, these don't confirm suicidal intent, but they're red flags for you to look at with compassion and for follow-up, because they're signs. A change in a routine. If they stop eating, they stop sleeping. They're sleeping all the time. If they're eating all the time, they lose a bunch of weight. If they gain a bunch of weight, these are flags of depression. Neglecting personal hygiene or appearance. If all of a sudden, little Matthew starts coming over and he stinks, and he's not washing his hair, and his clothes have stains on him, and he's never done that before. One time is a time, but regularly is a pattern, right? These are the things you want to look at. Preoccupation with death. Reading or writing about death or suicide. Anytime I'm dealing with teenagers particularly, but sometimes younger kids, if they see you as a safe person and you don't want to ask certain things because you're uncomfortable with it, you can say, can I see what you've been drawing? Can I see your journal? Because they often draw what they can't say. And the drawings that some of these kids can put out there are alarming. And they will give you a good insight into their mind. Sudden improvement. That one keeps coming up, and it's kind of subjective, but it's a big one. Reaching out to people to make amends, getting closure, making final things on Facebook. These are just things to watch out for, to maybe reach out to a person. We have myths about suicide. We think that if we talk about it, it won't happen. If we don't talk about it, people who talk about it won't do it. Many do talk about it first. You think if you talk about it, you might put the idea in their head. I've heard people say that to me so many times. I've talked to so many parents that say, I think they're cutting, but I don't want to ask. I don't want to give them the idea. I'm like, well, you're probably not going to give them the idea to self-harm. Again, if you're dealing with a mentally healthy person and you say, hey, if I would say, hey, Brother Mike, are you cutting? You're going to be like, well, absolutely no. And I didn't just plant that in his head, right? Because he's healthy-minded. You have to ask these questions directly. We also think it happens out of nowhere. There's warning signs. All the stuff I'm giving you that we see as like insignificant sometimes, or just little warning signs. And again, it's putting it all together into this big picture. Um, Only mentally ill people are suicidal, and that is just absolutely false. Because again, man, life is hard. Anybody can be at risk. I mean, my mother went through some serious things over the last little bit. She went through some health issues. I was called in 3 times to tell her bye over a course of 9 months. During that, we lost her mother. We lost my brother. It was just a time. And she is not a suicidal person, but you know what happens when a person goes through loss after loss after loss after loss? You put them on suicide. You put them on suicide watch. They're better, so they're safe. Again, sudden calm is a red flag. Again, not just by itself, but in the big picture. It's a really good time to reach out to somebody who all of a sudden is just better. Maybe kind of dig in that a little bit to see if they're better. You know, in churches, I do this in churches because the amount of people that I sit with that feel unsafe to talk to the people in their churches, 9 to 6, Monday through Thursday. And that's a hard one to say because people get offended at that one, but it's just the reality of it's just reality. People have a hard time sometimes because you get buck up, just change. And that's just not reality. And, there's just people in the Bible wept. They were sad. This is just part of life. So depression is often it's not a moral failing, right? It's not because someone's not praying enough or reading their Bible enough or trusting God enough. It is an emotional, mental, and physical state that's caused by a mixture of biological, psychological, spiritual, and situational factors. It is an onion. It is just an onion. You don't have one bad day and all of a sudden you're depressed or suicidal. You don't. It's a culmination of things that cause these things, and people just need a safe place. You can love Jesus and you can have a chemical imbalance. You can feel emotionally overwhelmed. You can struggle with grief, burnout, trauma. You can feel hopeless even when you know the truth of hope. I don't know if you've ever been there, but I know hope, but I felt hopeless. I don't know how that works. I can't even explain that to you. And I have a degree in how this all comes together, a few of them, and I can't even begin to explain that to you. But I've been hopeless, but I've known hope. I know Jesus, trying to get through this in a timely fashion. So here's the thing, how can you help? What do you need to do if you're feeling this way? What if you're the person in this room that is quietly suffering? What if you know someone who's quietly suffering? Talk to someone, reach out to a friend, a family member, your pastor, call Living Well. You don't have to do this alone. There are people that care. There are people that understand. There are people that want to help you. Name what you're feeling. Oftentimes, when we do isolate, have you ever just gone really internal and you just keep it all here? I think that may be why the statistics on men are higher, because that kind of, not gender specific, but it is a little gender specific. Man, just name it. I feel hopeless. Sometimes just getting your feelings out actually do help. There's crisis support. Um, break things down just to get through the next hour sometimes, because sometimes we're having a bad day, we're not having a bad life. And if we've had all this stuff pile on us and then we get that last straw, we feel like, okay, life is hopeless and everything's bad. Uh, so make a plan for somebody, help them, maybe sit with them for an hour, help them to just get through that next moment. It can make the difference in life and death. It really can. I have talked to people that they are in a crisis, and they are contemplating. They have a plan. They have a day. They have a way. I mean, they see no good, and you sit with them for 1 hour. And by the end of it, they're laughing and they're like, "Okay, I can do this. Yeah, this really wasn't as bad as I thought." Just give someone your hour. Lean into faith, obviously. Uh, Rest, unplug, cancel things, be gentle with yourself. I don't know. I know it's particularly young women with kids at home. They feel like if that checklist isn't done, the world's going to end. Uh, and the number one prescriber of antidepressants are young white females. And I often think that that's why, because they don't know how to say no, and they don't know when to stop. They feel like it's some sort of failure to let the dishes go, or to tell the kids no, or to not let them play soccer this season. But sometimes that's what required for a small time to rest and recover. Ask directly. This is how you can help. This is the part that I think people really get messed up with, because we don't want to ask hard questions. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Uh, People often ask, how do you sit with somebody like that? Like, you sit with them straightforward. This is a crisis situation, and if I think this person is going to leave my office and kill themselves, and I don't ask them directly, are you fixing to kill yourself? Then I have failed as just a human being in general, right? These are not words we like to say. Even saying that out loud, it's a harsh statement. Are you fixing to kill yourself? Do you have a plan? How would you kill yourself? These are harsh questions. But if you think someone is going to end their life, there is not a question I wouldn't ask, right? And if they have answers for any of those hard questions, how would you kill yourself? What day of the week would you kill yourself? And they have answers for those, you need help. You need help now. That's a plan, and that is when I put people inpatient. When you have a plan, it's time to go, okay? But they have to be direct. Don't hem-haw around about it. Listen without judgment. That's a big one. Stay with them. If you have a person and they go, yeah, I was thinking Tuesday, you call to get help. You sit with them until help arrives, because there's that space of time where they're alone. That's if people are feeling panicked, that's when they do it. Remove anything means as possible. If you go to an elderly person's house, because 75 and up, remember, that's high rate of suicide. And they're talking about maybe just taking some pills, maybe laying down for a while. Maybe it'd be a good thing to take those pills. Remove the items, right? And then obviously connect with crisis lines or professionals. Professional and community support. The importance of therapy and counseling, the amount of people that are embarrassed to say they go to counseling, or don't want to share it with their family, or don't want to share it with anyone. Like, if you come see me, I'm bound by HIPAA, right? So like, if I saw you in Walmart, I can't even say hi to you because I don't know you, right? And I think that's the only reason sometimes people will come, is because of the HIPAA compliance that I'm under, because they don't want anyone to know. Because we've made it that way, right? we've kind of made people feel bad about it. So we need to get the importance of it out there. Support groups and church communities. Huge support. Obviously, we all want our churches full of people for multiple reasons, right? But we need to pay attention to all of the things we just talked about for the people that are in our churches, regardless of the size. If you have 5 people, we're responsible for 5 people. If you have 500 people, we're responsible to help 500 people, right? And that's what that's about, is we need to support who's here and pay attention to these things and not kind of sweep them under the rug. I am so good on time. So this is just a call to action, basically, to the churches in general. We need to reduce the stigma around mental health, around talking about depression, around talking about suicide, around talking about substance abuse, which goes with all of that. We have got to speak openly about this in our communities, in our churches, in our homes, because if you're uncomfortable with it, it doesn't matter. Your kids are still feeling it. They're still talking about it. There's a whole internet world now out there that I get to deal with teenagers on TikTok who want to do some really crazy stuff to end their life because it's a game. These things need to be spoken about all the time. We live in a wild time. Be the light, offer love and support to those struggling. Obviously, always pray for people in need. But if we know someone specifically who's struggling, who's following that red flag pattern, it's going to be worth it to take your time with them. They're going to need that. Resources, obviously, hotlines. Living Well is always there. All you got to do is call. We have a new secretary. She'll get you set right up. If it's a crisis emergency, dial 911. Go to the hospital. They will help. And encouragement. There is always hope. And I think that's the ultimate message, right, that our churches put out and that we can put out. I mean, there is nothing without Jesus. He's ultimate hope. That's the thing that matters. But there's also just hope of getting through today, right? So that is depression and suicide. Is there open the floor for any questions or comments y'all have about any of that?